hold on, let's stop really racing to solution. Let's step back and really start to think about our intention here. The critical thinking thing is becoming even more and more important. Yeah, we might build the wrong thing business wise and cost wise, but we might build the wrong thing which has detrimental damage to our brand, to humanity, and that's even
Absolutely.
more
Yeah.
dangerous. The vibe coding tool, I don't like that word vibe coding. I think it simplifies something that's actually complex. Like, okay, these things were released out to the public or to the consumer it's targeted for without that critical thinking happening. There's just a rush to get stuff out. But the integrity layer needs to be added in now. And it's okay to say, this isn't the thing to build.
I'm Lauren Celenza, a Seattle-based writer and software designer. I write Tech Without Losing Your Soul, a newsletter that blends personal narrative and reporting to challenge unsustainable ideas about innovation and explore what it means to stay human and reclaim agency in an era of AI, rising inequality, and environmental distress. Over the past decade, I've worked in tech as a software designer at Google, Code for America, Adobe, the World Resources Institute, shaping and speaking about technology and its relationship to humanity across the globe. I'm excited to share with you today this in-depth interview with Amit Patel, founder and creative director at Experience Haus, a London-based design education and consultancy focused on hands-on learning for individuals and organizations navigating this wild economy. Amit has over 2 decades of experience in the design industry, working across sectors like banking and healthcare and infrastructure. And like myself, he cares a lot about making design, technology, and its industry more grounded in real-world context, ethics, and critical thinking. I first met Amit in Bangalore, India at Design Up Conference, where we both gave individual talks to an audience of about 1,400 designers, technologists, and business leaders. And Amit's perspective it stood out immediately. It was highly unique. It was incredibly relatable. And I wanted to invite him back in for a deeper one-on-one conversation. Together, we unpack why critical thinking and relationship building are essential skills in this AI era. We also discuss how newcomers in tech can survive a brutal job market disrupted by AI, and what human accountability means in 2026 as companies are deploying increasingly autonomous and agentic systems. What stayed with me most from this conversation is Amit's insight that while AI has immense productivity gains, it's also exposing unskilled thinking within us. The story of innovation today is one of speed, prompting, building, vibe coding as fast as we can to get an instant solution. But we often bypass the harder work of listening, learning, and deconstructing the problem before we build. That work is, at its root, critical thinking. And choosing to strengthen it, especially in this wild timeline, is an act of resistance. Amit, thank you so much for being here. How is 2026 shaping up for you so far? Where are you at?
Great opening question. So I spoke to a couple of professor friends, and they both independently spoke about this thing called relational energy, which I think is a great topic. I just want to be around people who are going to elevate, push, inspire. And so I looked back at last year and I thought, okay, who are the people that I spent a lot of time with, but just either took stuff away or just didn't help me contribute to like what I want to go towards. So that's been a big focus as well. So far, it's been a great start.
Relational energy. Yeah. For myself, personally, I'm doing well, but living in the U.S., it's been a horrific start.
Yes.
And with everything going on with ICE, I'm excited to continue holding conversations like this and with you because I feel like so much of our collective work is about reconnecting to community, reconnecting to real world context and consequence, reconnecting to accountability and, as you mentioned, relational energy. So
absolutely.
That's where I'm coming today. So I'm a little fired up to, to hold this conversation. But before we get into more of the depth of it, I kind of want to just first learn about you and, what first pulled you into design and how did that journey lead to Experience Haus?
The two things I like the most, or have not the most, but the two things that I really enjoy are design and basketball. And the first things I think about design, I think about taking 90s basketball sneakers and tearing them apart to understand how they were constructed. And then it started kind of being, okay, now I'm going to actually start to draw some of these sneakers out as pieces of art. And then eventually it became architecture. And then architecture was actually going to be my first choice for university. I ended up studying math. And then I think probably when the iPad came out, that's when I started thinking about digital design. But if you ask me today, like if I could go and design anything, like change my career completely, I would go and design stadiums. The shape, the purpose,
Yeah.
bringing
Yeah.
100,000 people together,
Yeah.
multi-purpose stadium. You turn it from a football stadium into a concert. The experience level, the engineering level, the community level, the integration into the cities, just the service layer of getting something like that off the ground is just a fascinating case study.
I feel like that connects to Experience House too, just in terms of like you're facilitating an experience, right, for students or for companies that you work with. So like, how do you think about that in terms of, I guess what you were talking about with design, you're kind of thinking about deconstruction a lot, and then you're thinking about building. So like there has to be maybe some deconstruct and building component to Experience House.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at like a student journey, they're coming in with a clear outcome of what they're trying to achieve. And I think sometimes it's down to us as the facilitators, the instructors, to kind of break that down and understand the student at its core, or at their core rather, start to look at strengths and gaps and trying to figure out how they fit into the cohort environment. There's a breakdown that happens with the individual to then kind of rebuild them to ultimately help them become a better designer and fulfilling career. We don't want them to come in and just do a course and then kind of walk out the door and never be part of like what we're trying to build. We want them to be kind of, use this as like setting the foundations for a long-lasting career, whatever they end up going to do. And then I think in terms of building, I've always treated Experience House like an ecosystem. And I think in 2026, we're starting to really see even more benefits of that. So bringing in external partners, we just agreed yesterday that we're going to do a whole venture building program. And that's going to be done in a partnership with somebody who's got real expertise in that. He's launched VC fund. The startups that get born out of that might be the startups that the students get to work on. And the main thing is just, going back to relational energy, just getting the right people. Just the right people to help you.
Yeah.
And I'm not interested at all in people that are just transactional and they just want this one thing coming out of it. Our students work on real projects. If that startup just wants a piece of work and then just wants to exit and not get anything in terms of a kind of relationship with the ecosystem out of it, we won't use them. For me, it's about constantly building those pieces and letting this kind of puzzle grow from 200 pieces to 500 pieces to 1,000 pieces, but just making sure they're always kind of related entities.
So we first met at Design Up conference in Bangalore, India, back in November, and we both gave individual talks to an audience of about 1,400 tech makers, designers, leaders from India and across Asia. And I remember sitting in the front row of your talk and just like fangirling over like how it felt very real. It felt very grounded. It felt like you were saying things that I think a lot of us have felt for a long time, but maybe haven't expressed. You opened your talk by tracing the 1848 California gold rush and drawing a sharp analogy to Silicon Valley and the global tech industry, showing how our race to strike gold, so to speak, through technology and now AI, that race can often erode our humanity and our ability to have relational energy and intellect. At one point in your talk, you said, you either are protecting the old world or you're building a new one. And I loved that phrase to really anchor on and think about. And you urge the audience in Bangalore to stop copying San Francisco and to design for the front lines of India, tier 2 cities, for local vernacular and dialect, for older generations, for rural populations. I'd love to ask, through the work that you do at Experience House, like how are you approaching, helping the next generation of tech makers and companies design with, I suppose it's relational energy involved, like thinking about the consequence, thinking about the context that you're designing for, the locality, and not just speed or not just advancing technology for technology's sake. How do you really help them understand that approach?
It's a great kind of question, because I think going back to like what has 2026 done so far, I think what I've seen, because obviously we do a lot of corporate work as well, and I'm starting to see now those corporates starting to realize they need to slow down. They need to slow down and start to do some of that upfront work when it comes to actually designing experiences, and obviously most of it is related to kind of AI. And so what's this causing them to do is start to think a lot stronger around what's the intent here, what's our kind of objective, what's the strong intent, should we even do this, and starting to kind of know when to say it's okay to pull the kill switch on this early. And then once they've kind of figured out the right intent and the right kind of objective and saying that this is something we should continue to explore, then I think it starts to become, okay, now let's bring in that intelligence layer and start to think about the data side of things and how, what, you know, and obviously there's some ethics that start to come with that. And then that kind of brings you into, all right, now let's bring in the integrity layer and start to really think, like, should we do this? What if something goes wrong? What if it hallucinates? What if it starts to spit out the wrong information, etc.? Hold on, let's stop really racing to solution. And this is a theme I'm seeing more and more. Let's step back and really start to think about our intention here. Ask the right critical questions up front. And we do workshops with our community where it's just critical thinking up front. We said we're not even going to touch rapid prototyping. We're not going to do any vibe coding at all. We're not going to think about the interface. We're literally going to spend 2 hours with a example case study. The critical thinking thing is becoming even more and more important. So rather than just saying we want a chatbot or we want some kind of AI-driven solution, let's step back and do that critical thinking up front, because it's just going to save us. Just like in the normal UX process, it reduced the risk of building the wrong thing. Here, it's almost like, yeah, we might build the wrong thing business-wise and cost-wise, but we might build the wrong thing, which has detrimental damage to our brand, to humanity, and
Absolutely.
that's even more dangerous. I really want our students to come out and not be the greatest visual designers or greatest UI designers. I want them to be the best critical thinkers. That's our goal.
Yep. Yeah. When you're doing these critical thinking workshops, I'm super curious, what are some of the reactions you get from people in the workshop, or like outcomes from it? That because what's interesting is, for so long, critical thinking hasn't really been a part of the curriculum for design.
Yeah, right.
And it's not an easy thing to teach. It's not an easy thing to learn. And we're always learning about it, right? It takes a lot of attention to how culture's changing and evolving, and what are your own values, and what, you know.
I mean, at a very high level, most of them have reacted with, like, actually, I'd never really thought this way. I would normally just rush to actually think about the interface.
Wow.
And how people are going to interact with the product. We felt like we needed a framework for designing AI. And like you said, no one's an expert in this space. It's moving fast. We're not saying, like, this is the world framework, the framework the whole world has to adhere to. What we've tried to do is create a framework with guiding questions that prompts that critical thinking to happen. The reaction has been very positive, and I think students, we've said to them, don't bring a laptop, don't bring anything. We're literally just going to be sitting there in groups, and you're going to have a case study to work through, and we want you to debate and open up this question, just like open up these questions just like you would be with a client. And we said, like, when every team has to play back, for example, we want to know why you would say to a client, this shouldn't go ahead. Like, that is super powerful. Not just saying, let's just take it on and just do it. The ability to kind of come back and say, we could do it, but here are the implications, or here are some challenges that need to be addressed, or we should not do this because of this reason. I think as educators, we need to just make sure that we're not just throwing them into a situation that they're not really prepared for debate-wise. Have some prompted questions ready to go that gets the conversation going.
The interesting thing is that, you know, students and newcomers could learn this, right? This critical thinking skill set, and yet still face a very difficult labor market where in the hiring process, they may not be asking or even looking for designers and tech makers who have a critical thinking skill set. They may want someone who is a more visual designer. Not to say there isn't critical thinking in that, but like just other skill sets that companies may be looking for. On top of the fact that, you know, entry-level jobs, tech jobs right now are shrinking fast as AI is accelerating. So, you know, a November 2025 study by Stanford University that analyzed payroll records found that early career workers around the ages of 22 to 25 in the U.S. experienced a 13 to 16% decline in employment since the widespread adoption of generative AI. And then a new report from the Institute of Student Employers found that the UK tech industry experienced a 46% drop in tech graduate jobs from 2024, and they project a 53% drop in 2026. So there's a lot of statistics that are coming to the surface now about what's happening for newcomers in this market. And then on top of that, the hiring process itself is increasingly automated with AI as well. So according to a recent study from the Society of for Human Resource Management, 67% of organizations now use some form of AI in recruitment. So what do you make of these signals, and how should designers and tech makers like interpret what's happening, and like what's next for them?
This is super interesting. Our students at Experience Haus are typically 24 to 40 years old, right? So we get some young people, we get some people who are kind of mid-career, some people who've been working for quite a while, then are refreshing. I'm very honest with people in saying that, look, the market it's not great. It's a tough market. I was talking to somebody today who runs a startup community platform where their sole remit is basically to find junior to mid-weight roles for startups. It's fascinating. I think we may end up doing some kind of like partnership with them to help our students kind of find pathways. They said for some roles they're getting 5,000 applications.
Wow.
Okay,
I believe
so
it.
it's just like
Yeah.
it's like that's nuts. I mean, 500 enough is enough. I think LinkedIn might cap at 500 and then you like have to take the roll down. I don't know, but 5,000 is nuts. This isn't just impacting tech and design. There's lots of other kind of fields that are starting to feel that impact. And then obviously if people start to think, well, where can I go with my career? Design and tech becomes, especially design, becomes a very kind of a great field for them because there's a lot of transferable skills that come into that. I've seen a lot of people have views where you may have to start, accept a role that's on the periphery of what you want to be doing. So say it's product design or UX design, you may have to kind of go into like, I don't know, graphic or customer service type of role to kind of find your way in. I'm okay with that as saying, because if some people do that, because again, that's as long as it's kind of an incremental way to get to where you want to go to, that's okay. I think if you look at the junior roles, that's probably those are the roles where AI, if you're a business, you're probably thinking AI is probably the thing that I can replace that junior role with. I've seen it in Experience Haus as well. We don't, some of the things that we're doing and we're automating now, we obviously have seen that we're able to kind of, work much, much smarter. We've changed the way our organizational structure works. And it's, it wasn't initially to do with AI, but now we're much kind of leaner because of that. There's no doubt about it. At the same time, I wouldn't say internally in organizations that they are just literally completely ready to go with this AI. I'm seeing a complete mix of appetite. I'm seeing a complete mix of hunger and understanding and that curiosity that comes with exploring AI at the moment. I'm seeing some people who are kind of still on the fence whether this is a bubble or not. So I see a difference in terms of like what's happening within companies, but they're just part of the machine and they probably kept their role safe somehow. I think it's unfortunate that the market is where it is. As educators, have the due diligence to let people know that, look, it is a tough market, but don't give up. Start figuring these tools out. You may have to find other ways to get there. You may have to freelance when you maybe weren't necessarily ready to do that. Whatever you're doing, just make sure it's kind of incrementally getting you to where you want to get to. I don't see it changing. I think the businesses are going to look at this as like an opportunity to cut costs and to remove some of those roles. But I think eventually, I don't know when, but I do hope that those junior roles, that starting point for a lot of people does come back. There's a lot of people entering this space who want to get into, say, tech and design. Obviously, it's impacted by a lot of the changes and the numbers you've spoken about that highlight that. But I still think there's a lot of people who think they can just take these courses and try and move, or even as a graduate, and think, okay, world, come and find me. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Right?
Especially right now. Yeah.
Especially right now. It just does not work. The ones that I'm seeing that are still having, we just had 2 people finish a course on Tuesday, which was yesterday, and they've already landed like freelance roles to start doing some design work based off the course they did. But they were networking. They were going out there and seeking those opportunities. They're connecting into communities. They're keeping those skills sharp. And I think if I speak to students who are finishing our courses, like, make sure I still see you. Because once you're out of this picture and once you leave and you're like sitting in a coffee shop waiting for someone to find you, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Relational energy, that networking, the community aspect, that's going to be stronger than ever to help people get through this.
What's the responsibility, though, of employers, mentors, like senior technologists and designers? Because there's a lot of advice out there for emerging designers and tech makers. And I've heard so many students and newcomers say, like, okay, I've taken all the advice, or I've worked really hard, or I'm, trying to network, and I've done everything I could, and I'm still in the slog of this, and I feel like it's not getting me anywhere. And I do think a big part of that is a responsibility on employers, mentors, and senior technologists to like step up and support them in some way, whether it's sharing resources or sharing their network or
Yeah.
giving them the time to have a coffee chat conversation with them. How do you think more experienced tech and design leaders should be showing up for newcomers right now in this age of AI?
It's all of that, right? I think obviously there's time limited. I would love to mentor many. If I could, obviously I can't. And if I can give someone half an hour and go for a coffee, of course I'll do that. I can't, like, we're all busy. We can't do it for everyone.
Of course,
But
yeah.
I think which is going back to what I think we're trying to do with our community is let's keep you going. Let's keep you motivated. Let's get you back here twice a month, learning new skills, staying on top of, and then these sessions aren't just technical tools. They are, yesterday we had a talk from one of our instructors around people skills in the AI era. And then we'll do stuff on like data. We are doing these, and I'm very straightforward with our alumni, and I've started to said bring in people if you want, but we're doing these for you. We're literally doing these for you, and we want you to tell us. What's really interesting is, I just tell you two things. Number one, no one comes back and tells us what they want. I don't know why. Maybe it's our due diligence, like our responsibility to kind of go and do that for them, and that's fine. Number two, 98% of the people that are coming to these free sessions, it's women.
Wow.
I don't get it.
Yep.
I don't really
What
get
does
it.
that say?
And it's saying something. I don't know what, but it's staying that way. I think companies should be doing more of this stuff. Like put out, say we're gonna do a I don't know, like say it's JP Morgan or a bank. Say we're gonna do a hackathon. We're gonna invite just people from the community, just come in and do a hackathon with our people, with our engineers, whatever. Like give them a sense of like what it's like to work there. Give them a sense of like networking with some of these engineers who may become mentors. Like open your doors up and let people have access to you. I think we need to be doing stuff like that. And I understand that there's probably some frustration with some of the mentoring platforms that are out there. I think there's been argument around, it's paid for access and the quality of the mentors. I've never really tried to like get involved in any of those platforms because we have our own platform, but I definitely want to open this up and say, like, let's use this as an opportunity to just keep you motivated. And yes, it's a tough market. At the same time, we're going to just make sure that you're still learning new things and still kind of networking and keep that going, because eventually they will get that role and then they'll give back.
Right. And I love the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. There's been a lot of discourse about that, of like, sponsorship is less about giving advice and more of advocate for that person when you're in the hiring room, or like be there for them. And I think that that's huge as well. And doesn't need to take a lot of time or energy. It's really about thinking about them in that moment. We could talk forever about mentorship as a whole other topic, but I want to move on. I actually want to move on, but I want to circle back to what you said about critical thinking, because there's so much there that, like, let's get into that. I follow you on Instagram. On Instagram, you posted a few hot takes that I love about AI. And one of your hot takes said that how AI in 2026 won't be about bigger models, but rather about bigger capability gaps. And you wrote that AI will expose unskilled thinking. And AI training needs to teach critical thinking, ethics and context, decision-making under uncertainty, and real-world application. I couldn't agree more. However, the AI discourse, particularly I think within the design and tech industry, often like fixates on tools and models, and it overlooks gaps in critical thinking, ethics, privacy, the environmental impact of data centers, real-world application of AI. Why do you think that is?
Speed to market, solutions, profits, being the one that's out there with the best model, the best kind of solution. When we introduced our framework to our students, it said, look, we've created this, amongst our instructional team, we've created this framework that we want to use when we're designing AI experiences, and we were going to try it out. I remember setting the scene. It was like, this morning I went on the news, and 2 out of the top 5 news on the BBC were about AI models or AI solutions being used in the wrong way. And
there you go.
Right, there you go. Why are these out there? Why are they being used? Who didn't think about the situations or the scenarios of how people actually use these things as well? And now this is just dominating the news. So for me, it's like when I look at that, like, okay, these things were released out to the public or to the consumer it's targeted for without that critical thinking happening. There's just a rush to get stuff out. Who's got the best model? And you can even see it with the vibe coding tool. I don't like that word, vibe coding. I think it simplifies something that's actually complex.
Say it.
But rapid pro, whatever you want to call them, Lovable, Figma, Make, Bolt, etc. they are racing against each other. They're just constantly releasing new features and trying to figure out who's going to be the heavyweight moving forward. Um, and it's a rush for attention. It's a rush for market share. It's a rush for enterprise deals. All of that kind of stuff that's happening. And so I don't know if that's going to go away. I think that's just the way the business world works. However, we as educators, as people who are kind of teaching and coaching and mentoring and builders, we need to make sure that that critical thinking takes a step back and is actually underpinning all of this work. And I think it's also interesting, like there's so many useful tools, there's so many kind of use cases for it, but ultimately it comes down to how do we make sure that right intent, the integrity, the ethics, all of that stuff is being done early on. There's no expert in any of this stuff. I know there's great courses, there's great people that are speaking about it, like yourself and all the other speakers in Bangalore, for example. We just need to make sure people are really listening and taking this stuff into account. And as a designer, I think this is the type of stuff that I need to be really paying attention to and making sure I'm building into my skill set, and make sure I'm putting that into my roadmap for 2026, saying I'm going to spend time understanding the ethics, the integrity of these models. I think what's actually fascinating, I'm going to try this at my workshop in Dubai, is I'm going to take a model or a solution that's already out there, and we're going to tear it apart and go right back to let's reverse engineer it. And I haven't. Yep. I'm going to spend some time on this Friday in a coffee shop and kind of work how I'm going to try and do that. There's a solution. It's working. Let's reverse engineer it back to what was the original kind of all the way down to what was the original ask, and where were the questions around ethics, data, privacy, all that. Where do you think that came up? When do you think it was all kind of tabled? I'm going to try and do something like that, because I think that's what we need to do. Look, as engineers, designers, many of us learn by reverse engineering. And I think it would be great to reverse engineer an AI solution like Grok and figure out where some of those decisions overlooked or not made that led to all the challenges it's having now.
This makes me think about where I've taken my own career, where for a long time I was mostly doing design. And then around 2020, 2021, I introduced writing as a practice. And then I started doing it a little bit professionally. And I have a Substack now. As I started doing more writing, I started to notice how it was actually making me a better designer. Because writing requires you to have the critical thinking skills to think of what's your argument, what's your perspective, what's the counter argument of this, how are you deconstructing, is it really what it is at the surface, or could there be more there to research and dig into? How are you feeling about it? All of those things helped me as a designer then to go in and think about, wait a minute, when we're thinking about the roadmap for this product or shaping this interface in a certain way. Oh, wait a minute, but what if it doesn't work in that way? It just started to really open up a whole new conversation in my head. And then I would sort of translate that out loud to the teams I was working with. And then it created more enriching, I think, conversation that we were having. So I just want to go into that point of deconstruction and the process of it's not only about learning, but it's really about what do we need to unlearn so that we can be more open to new possibilities. What do you think the design and tech industry needs to unlearn?
Okay, so this is a fascinating one, because it's a lot of the workshops I facilitate with corporates. They have to unlearn constraints, how to step away from everything. If you go into a bank, I get it, it's regulated, etc. But all they're thinking is just constraint first. Now, of course, we're talking about AI, so there's obviously some challenges there. But I think the ability to go wide is great, and is super, super important. But classic design thinking, you bring in, okay, what's the desirability, feasibility, kind of viability of this? However, this is now bringing in a fourth dimension. There's a fourth wheel now, which is about integrity, right? Or so the other pillars exist, and now there's an integrity layer. Can we actually build this? Do we have the intelligence to build it in terms of data? Does it make sense for the business financially and reputationally? Do people want it? All of that exists, but the integrity layer needs to be added in now. The unlearning bit is, again, a lot of companies are still stuck in constraint-driven kind of approaches. Unlock that, but make sure now you bring in at the right time those critical layers that allow you to take something forward. And it's okay to say, this isn't the thing to build. It's not safe to build it. And I think companies need to hopefully start to figure that part out as well.
And usually what I find is the constraint is time constraint. We don't have a lot of time to think about this in depth, but oftentimes there's really only an MVP, a minimal viable product, and then and then teams don't continue on. They move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And then it's the same cycle of like, we have this time constraint. I would love to see myself and others like unlearn this pressure to always be solving, like always be trying to figure out the solution before you even figured out, well, what questions do I have about this?
Oh, this is fascinating. So this is another exact thing that I'm trying to do more and more is question storming. So as soon as I've got a problem, take a step back, because we rush to coming up with solutions, but we don't sit there and brainstorm all the questions we have. I think that's something people need to get better at. I think everyone needs to get better at that. It's like, because that's really forcing you to really think about the unknowns, the assumptions, the integrity questions. What if this happens? What if that happens? It's like brainstorming. You're not trying to answer them, but get all those questions out. And along the path of the process you go through, you should start to kind of, start to get the answers. But if you don't, and you just kind of start saying, okay, we've got it, let's just jump into the process, there's going to be gaps. There's going to be kind of a lack of critical thinking that you've kind of, and that brings up the challenges later on when you start to implement.
That's a good segue into my next question, which is about agentic AI. Mm-hmm. On Instagram, you also wrote, agentic AI will fail without human accountability. And more autonomy doesn't mean less responsibility. So in 2026, the strongest teams and companies will ask, where does human judgment sit? Where does AI stop? Who owns the decision? These are all, I think, the critical thinking questions to be asking when it comes to agentic AI. In practical terms, what do you think human accountability looks like when AI is starting to increasingly make autonomous decisions? Who ultimately owns the outcome in that world?
It's a great question. And you look at like some of the tools that we're using as designers, part of our workflow, they only work if you know what good looks like. If I don't know what good looks like, how can I say that I trust this tool to actually do the right thing or create the output for me? And obviously you see when you get an output, say from a ChatGPT or a Gemini, if it's not the right thing, you go back and you reprompt it. And by the way, when you talked about writing, the only thing that most people are writing nowadays is just prompts. That's all they write now, which is why I also and you're absolutely right. When I started doing the voice notes and started putting together my notes for a potential book, it started really getting me thinking about the depth, the emotion I wanted to evoke from this thing. But you're absolutely right. I think designers of today, if you're an up-and-coming designer, to help you really stay on top of what's happening, get writing a Substack or a blog or something. Not many people do that as tech grads. They're not doing it.
And you don't even have to publish it if you don't want to, right?
No.
Like just the practice of it is what I think matters.
I have to know what good looks like. Right.
And you can't ask, I don't think you can ask AI that.
No.
Yes, AI will spit out a response based on the patterns that it is looking at for that. Yeah. But like ultimately, based on your lived experience, correct, and the mistakes you've made along the way, or that museum that you went to, or that place or person that you met that like opened your mind to a different aesthetic or a different idea of what a solution could be. This is about that lived experience that AI can't give that answer to you.
No, you're absolutely right. It's obviously feeding itself up whatever data is there, and it's using for its model. I think the evaluation and of the testing of these models is going to become even more crucial. So as designers, our role in not only doing that critical thinking up front, shaping what the product needs to be doing, what good looks like in terms of outputs. Now we have to make sure that as designers we're getting back involved in the evaluation of the models, making sure that it's actually doing what the human is expecting. So if you're thinking about as a new designer entering this space, and you've maybe learned about UX or product design, and now you're realizing probably the thing you're going to be building is an AI product, and now we need to learn how to like work with engineers to validate models. Oh, this is opening up a whole bunch of new stuff that people need to go away and learn. Human accountability to me is, again, that lived experience, knowing what good looks like, making sure that the valuation of the model is being done in the right way, looking at the potential scenarios that might come up. This is all part of that critical, wide thinking that is becoming more and more important. I think people that are quite closed off or introducing those constraints or don't have the patience to work through that detail, that's going to be kind of something that's going to be a bit flawed, or a flawed kind of set of skills moving forward.
What are like the first steps that you think teams and companies can take today to start building this mindset of critical thinking, accountability? How should they be thinking about defining where AI stops and where human accountability begins? Do you have any like first initial steps they can think about or take to get there?
One of the important things for companies to do, and I think, I'm starting to see it, is there some of the companies that we're starting to have been working with, is They're willing to take a step back and say, let's step away from work for a couple of days or a day or whatever, and
Yes,
say, right,
yes.
we're gonna put some hypothetical problems to you, and we're gonna put you through some different fun exercises to start to practice some of those skills, and then now let's bring that back into work. That is a leadership thing. That's good leaders kind of recognizing that needs to happen. Not everything has to be rooted in solving kind of the work problems. Like step away, do some fun exercises that gets the mind thinking a little bit differently, and in problem spaces that aren't your normal kind of everyday problem spaces. That I think is a big step. These models, we are obviously seeing the productivity enhancements, the innovation opportunities, but there's this responsibility that we have. We may need to kind of reset the way that we problem solve. We may need to reset the depth we go to. We may need to rethink the systems approach when we kind of think about AI solutions now, or the roles and contributions that we all play, or the kind of the responsibilities we have. If you don't take time to take stock of all of that, companies are going to run into problems.
Stepping away, that stepping away piece, like I talk a lot with other designers about how we're staring at the same Figma files all day long. If you're a product manager, you're staring at the same like Slack messages and like product requirements. If you're an engineer, you're staring at the code. Like there's no way for any of us as human beings to come up with fresh perspective or ideas if we're always looking at the same or thinking about the same problems and the same screens and the same routines. Innovation is found when we break that routine. And when COVID happened, a lot of that kind of immersive research that teams would do fell away, and then research teams are still getting cut left and right across the industry. And I wish so much, I'm just putting this out there in the universe, I wish so much for that practice to come back, because I do feel like that's where true innovation lives.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think going back to your point around what employers, organizations, communities can be doing is like opening up the doors and giving the people the opportunity to work like that. It'll be so valuable for humanity to have these skills developed. We work with one bank in America, and when we were kind of helping them kind of develop this like constraint-free way of thinking, well, you're a bank, so what we're going to do is we're going to help you. You're going to all design hotel experiences for 2 days. You're not talking about work. That has nothing to do with it. And we're going to put you into different teams, and you're going to work with different people that you don't normally work with, and you're going to have to say hello to somebody that you've never met, or you've met only on Slack. Tomorrow afternoon, you're going to pitch the new concept. And then, after that's done, now let's bring it back into work. Let's use those tools. You're more comfortable with them. You've seen in a lighthearted way how they work. Now let's bring them back into this environment. I think it's a leadership thing that will make that happen, and people understanding that. Again, we speak to some organizations, well, billable hours, we can't take people out of the office, blah, blah, blah. But that's going to have an effect down the line. I've seen already the differences between leaders that get it and are bought into that, and the leaders who will still put a bit of a price on it, and then some who are just like, no, like this is just not what we need to be doing. You'll start to see the difference. To your point, the companies that are doing it well and are innovating well, you'll start to see a difference.
Yeah, and when you go outside too and like immerse yourself in different environments and talk to the people that you're building with and for, you see these leading indicators that your data isn't picking up on yet, of like how culture's changing, how they're using their, your product in different ways. Like that can. And I know business leaders right now are like, we can't even create a roadmap that's like a year, because like there's so much uncertainty right now, which is so fair. But there's still leading indicators of how culture is changing that you can go and witness that could help inform both the near term and the long term as much as we can with the long term. There's just real tangible business value to it as well that I would want more leaders to recognize.
Yeah. This whole thing around cultural fluency and knowing, because we're in an era where your product can scale quicker than ever, and understanding how it's going to be interpreted, used in different cultural contexts. Most people don't even have an idea of even how to start thinking about that. They're thinking about 3 personas in London and this, but that product is going to be used all over the world, and you've got totally different use cases for it, totally different ways of living their lives, but you're trying to figure that out through these 3 personas here in London. It doesn't work.
Too many constraints. So to wrap us up, this has been so lovely and so like just inspiring. So thank you for just sharing your honest thoughts and kind of thinking in the moment. What is one surprising lesson that you've learned from your students or alumni that has deepened your own sense of accountability and responsibility in what you do, or maybe change your perspective in some way?
Yesterday I was talking to this lovely lady who just finished her course, and she's like, I love what you built. You've just, it's the community aspect, and you can see the passion. I'm like, look, it's not me, it's the people. It's you guys who are bringing it, and you're doing the work, you're studying. The instructors like Michael are teaching, the startups are bringing energy when they're kind of working with you. It's just getting the right people together. And sometimes we just need one person to kind of, I will kind of harness that, but I'm not the one who's constantly there building, delivering all that energy on a daily basis. But at the same time, I do feel like I'm responsible for making sure that we're doing the things the right way. We're getting people to think the right way. We don't want our courses to be easy. I don't like the word intensive, but immersive, and make them think just completely different than they normally would have thought in their previous roles, kind of embedding that in their future. It's not an ego thing, but I think you sometimes need someone to kind of wave the flag and say, look, we're here, we're trying to build the future thinkers of tomorrow. And that comes is accountability. And then if people are on that journey with them, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to hold you accountable for what it means to be on this journey with us. And I want people to kind of, be able to kind of come to me and say, these are the things we want to do or we should be doing, and just being responsible for that. But I think everyone in our ecosystem is responsible for making that ecosystem come together.
It's a great note to end on, relational energy. I think it's a good theme for 2026. I do.
The amount of people that have messaged and are kind of using it as a framework for their approach for 2026 without even us talking about it. The right people, the right energy. It's not transactional. People that are actually going to help me get to where I want to get to, and that I can give them something back in return as well.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to build those skills not only for the industry and context we're talking about, but as humans living in a really difficult time where authoritarianism is spreading across the world. Strengthening our relational skill sets and energy is what will, I think, pull us through and unite us in a way that can overcome a lot of that. We've seen that throughout human history, and I believe that to be true today. So thank you for offering that wisdom, especially at a practical way that we can start to practice today.